November 20th, 2022. Reports reveal the unexpected announcement that the chief executive officer of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Chapek, was fired from his position and was immediately replaced by his predecessor, Bob Iger. It was news that left the world in shock, but after the initial reaction, it was a moment of celebration, especially for Disney fans. In the company's recent history, there are very few names that give that sense of disgust more so than Bob Chapek, who led Disney for only a few years, but caused so much damage in that short amount of time. In fact, some say that many of Disney's problems during the first half of the 2020s was due to Chapek's incompetence. But how was it possible for him to even have that position in the first place? Amongst everyone who was working at Disney at the time, why leave it in the hands of such an inept man? This is the story of how weak leadership, poor business decisions, and a series of uncontrollable and unfortunate events resulted in some of the company's most challenging years in their history. Under Chapek's management, he led Disney's reputation down a free fall from being the most powerful entertainment corporation to the biggest target of hate in modern culture, with a significant number of failures. So, how did Bob Chapek become Disney's worst CEO? Well, let's find out. Our story begins back in 2019, which was considered to be one of the company's strongest years. In that time alone, they were able to achieve many noteworthy accomplishments and successes. They completed the Fox acquisition for $71.3 billion. Star Wars Galaxy's Edge opened at both Disneyland and Walt Disney World and gathered massive crowds. Avengers Endgame broke the record of the highest grossing film ever. They released 7.5 of the 9 movies that earned more than $1 billion that year. I say and a half because Spider-Man Far From Home is an MCU movie. And most importantly, the company debuted their latest primary venture, Disney+. However, it was also the year when then CEO Robert Iger announced that when his contract ends in 2021, he would leave the company, and later said that he was ready to retire. And after all the game-changing plans he achieved for the company, including the acquisitions of Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and 21st Century Fox, Iger only had one major mission left during his time at Disney: to find his successor. During Iger's time throughout the 2010s, Disney's next CEO was a subject that many industry insiders were interested in, and several possible candidates were speculated. There was Chief Financial Officer Jay Rossello, but he left the company in 2015. Then there were rumors that the Chief Operating Officer, Tom Staggs, would be next, but that idea quickly vanished when he quit in 2016. There was the chairman of Walt Disney Television, Peter Rice, but he joined the company in 2017 as part of the Fox acquisition, so he was a little too new to be the leader. And then there was the chairman of Direct-to-Consumer and International, Kevin Mayer. At the time, he was a key player in Disney's businesses, where he not only helped out on the company's big acquisitions, but also led the launches of Disney's streaming platforms like Disney+, ESPN+, and Hulu under their majority stake. He was very close to getting that title, but there was one person within the company with more operating experience than Mayer who had him beat.
How can you say that? Look at our kingdom.
I know. It's just that my magic can feel it. I can feel it.
Robert Chapek was considered a rising star within the Walt Disney Company. He began as a marketing director in the home entertainment division in 1993 and climbed up the ranks in the sector to earn the title of the home entertainment industry's single biggest success story, thanks to Disney's tremendous sales on VHSs, DVDs, and Blu-rays. He then received an upgrade in 2011, where he was the president of consumer products, making sure that the newly acquired Star Wars franchise properly fitted with Disney's licensing program and making a major deal with Hasbro. Then, in 2015, he was promoted to the chairman of Parks and Resorts, looking over the company's latest expansions and signature rides, including the construction of Galaxy's Edge. And then in 2018, Both parks and resorts and consumer products fused into one larger division, with Chapek given the confidence to take charge of it. However, his leadership in the parks was also met with criticism for making some controversial choices, including the complete dependency on existing IPs, retheming California's Tower of Terror into Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, and spearheading the idea of a Star Wars-themed hotel. But what really made him stand out at that point was how he was able to turn big investments into big profits. During his time as chairman, Chapek invested over $24 billion in the Parks and Resorts division. That's almost double than how much Disney spent on acquiring Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm combined. And yet, it more than paid off when it was noted in the fall of 2017 that the division saw a 14% increase in income. Despite his lack of experience in the creative side of Disney, his business skills were noted to be some of the best in the company and made him a frontrunner to become Iger's successor. For a few years, the question of the next CEO was still a mystery, and insiders were keeping a careful eye on who Bob Iger would choose. It wasn't until after the company's big year in 2019 when the winner was announced.
The major business headline this evening, news from our parent company, Disney. After a storied run, our longtime CEO, Bob Iger, stepping down in that role to become executive chairman. And stepping in as CEO, Bob Chapek, who had been chairman of Disney Parks, Experiences, and Products.
The company said on Tuesday that it is naming Bob Chapek as its next CEO, succeeding Bob Iger immediately.
Bob Iger will step down as CEO of Disney, but effective immediately. Investors have reason to be surprised. Iger had recently signed an extension to his contract. Now, he will remain as executive chairman through next year. And the former head of Disney Parks, Bob Chapek, will take the CEO job.
On February 25, 2020, Disney's board of directors made the sudden announcement that Bob Iger was stepping down as the CEO of Disney and immediately gave his position to Bob Chapek. However, as his contract didn't expire until the end of 2021, Iger stayed for the time being as executive chairman, leading the board and taking charge of the company's creativity. Along with the announcement, Iger put out a comment stating,
"With the successful launch of Disney's direct-to-consumer businesses and the integration of 21st Century Fox well underway, I believe this is the optimal time to transition to a new CEO. I have the utmost confidence in Bob and look forward to working closely with him over the next 22 months as he assumes his new role and delves deeper into Disney's multi-factor global businesses and operations, while I continue to focus on the company's creative endeavors."
Meanwhile, Chapek added,
"I am incredibly honored and humbled to assume the role of CEO of what I truly believe is the greatest company in the world, and to lead our exceptionally talented and dedicated cast members and employees. Bob Iger has built Disney into the most admired and successful media and entertainment company, and I have been lucky to enjoy a front row seat as a member of his leadership team. I share his commitment to creative excellence, technological innovation, and international expansion, and I will continue to embrace these same strategic pillars going forward. Everything we have achieved thus far serves as a solid foundation for further creative storytelling, bold innovation, and thoughtful risk-taking."
However, it is worth noting that some people found the timing of that announcement to be suspicious, especially when the passing of the torch felt sudden. I'm not saying that there's a connection, but it's quite a coincidence how the reveal happened at the same time as a concerning event was beginning. A few months prior, at the end of 2019, a growing number of pneumonia cases was starting in Wuhan, China. But the cause of this pneumonia was not like anything that was medically known. It was the result of a mysterious novel coronavirus that was gradually spreading across China. And it didn't take long for other countries to get a taste of the disease and see it grow larger within their regions. And once the virus blanketed the entire planet, that was when it made its proclamation, "Welcome, everyone, to the new pandemic."
Things are changing, and they're changing fast. The way we live, the way we work, our sense of safety.
The president's words come after the World Health Organization today declared the coronavirus a global pandemic, citing the alarming levels of spread, but also the alarming levels of inaction, in their words.
Every part of the United Kingdom is now in lockdown, with people being urged to stay at home as the scale of the public health emergency becomes even more daunting.
Germany has now closed its border with France. The country has also done the same with Austria, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Denmark. This is to try to curb the spread of coronavirus in Europe, which has become the epicenter of the outbreak.
During the first quarter of 2020, the world was progressively in lockdown due to the COVID-19 outbreak. The Walt Disney Company, like all major corporations, was almost hit immediately by the consequences of it. A month before Chapek was the new CEO, their Chinese parks, Hong Kong Disneyland and Shanghai Disneyland, closed down, and 3 days after his new job, Tokyo Disneyland followed suit. It wasn't until mid-March when the rest of their parks like Disneyland, Walt Disney World, and Disneyland Paris had to do the same to mark the first time in history that all the Disney parks had to be closed. On top of the cruises that had to stop making their voyages. But that wasn't the only division that got hit hard. Virtually the entire company had to be closed. Productions for movies and series had to be stopped, stage musicals were completely closed, and the Broadway version of Frozen became a casualty as it wouldn't return after the shows reopened, and the lack of sports left ESPN pretty much empty. The only main division that Disney had that could adapt during that time was animation, as artists were able to continue their work at home with the help of some extra tools. But the most significant impact to Disney was that movie theaters had to be closed. The timing of that could not have been worse, since during the start of the lockdowns, the Pixar movie Onward was still fresh in theaters. But after all the closings, the film prematurely became a box office flop. On the bright side, Disney released the film digitally a few days afterwards, where the home release turned the movie into a hit. However, the closed cinemas were a critical issue, as it completely ruined their planned release schedule and were incapable of properly presenting their movies. As you can imagine, Chapek started his job as CEO in a nightmare, where almost everything was inoperable due to a deadly disease that conquered the world. Even if Iger stepped up as co-CEO to help Bob keep the company afloat, they knew it was going to be their biggest challenge of their careers. The first priority that Chapek wanted to take care of was the parks, and making plans to open them carefully so that they can be operational again in a way that the virus doesn't spread. Throughout the year, after the first wave subsided, one by one, Chapek reopened the parks with additional guidelines to protect guests from catching COVID, like social distancing, limited capacities, temperature checks, mask mandates, and a higher priority on cleaning. They started with Shanghai Disneyland in May of 2020 and opened the last one with the original Disneyland at the end of April the following year. There was no problem for Bob to handle that, since that was his domain before leading the company. But then there was the problem regarding the movies. For someone who was never involved in that specific field, what can you do to keep that business going with no theaters open and an uncertain future of when they'll return? Of course, they had no choice but to delay the vast majority of their schedule, but the good news was that they had a new platform that they could utilize to deliver audiences some entertainment straight to their homes in the meantime. There were a few movies that they chose to skip the big screen in favor of going straight to Disney Plus, such as Artemis Fowl, The One and Only Ivan, and the recording of the stage musical Hamilton. But then there was the live-action remake of Mulan, to which the company decided to give the movie a $30 US premium access. And yes, you had to pay that on top of your subscription. It was a controversial move, but let's not talk about this movie's controversies because then we would be here forever. However, speaking of controversial moves, what is possibly their most visible action of that year was the company's plan with one of their biggest properties, Pixar. In 2020, not only did they had Onward planned, but also another movie that was directed by the studio's chief creative officer, Pete Docter, called Soul. They tried to delay its release in the hopes that it could be out in theaters, but because COVID was a stronger force than they expected, Disney chose to give up the big screen for the film and put it up on Disney Plus during Christmas, much to the dismay of Docter and the team at Pixar. And no, Soul did not get a premium access. But the biggest consequence of the pandemic's first year is the financial toll that it took on the economy. and Disney was no exception. With almost no movies released in theaters and some of the parks could only open to a certain extent, the company reportedly lost billions of dollars, and many employees unfortunately had to pay the price. Thousands of layoffs had to be done, 100,000 workers were no longer paid, but still got their healthcare benefits, and even the Bobs had to make sacrifices to their salaries, like Chapek reduced his to half, while Iger completely gave up his payment. Even early in the following year, the biggest sacrifice the company had to make because of COVID was shutting down Blue Sky Studios, the animation company behind the Ice Age movies, to which they received from the Fox acquisition.
Okay, let me guess. She dumped you.
What is wrong with me?
After that decision, however, Disney was focused on making 2021 a time of healing. Now that a vaccine was developed and began its distribution, the company was starting to slowly put things back to where they were before, including removing guidelines one at a time in the parks and reopening Disneyland. But that doesn't mean that everything was back to business. There was still the issue of how they would release their movies. Sure, theaters were slowly opening their doors again, but there was still some hesitancy to make people go back to the big screen in fear of their movies would cause another outbreak. So what could they do? Do they release them theatrically or stick with Disney Plus and put them out directly in people's homes?
¿Por qué no las dos?
Their solution to the progress of the pandemic at the time was to give their bigger pictures simultaneous releases, where the public was given the choice to either watch the latest Disney movie on the big screen or on Disney Plus through premium access, which was what they did with films like Cruella and Jungle Cruise. However, not everyone was happy with the decision, especially movie theater owners. They were pretty upset towards studios who didn't fully commit to releasing their pictures exclusively to theaters. And that was especially the case with Disney when they moved some of their big movies onto streaming. So when Disney did the double release with Raya and the Last Dragon in March, some theater chains like Cinemark and Cineplex chose to boycott the film, which did damage to its box office earnings, but did make up for it for being the third most streamed movie of 2021. But that was tame compared to the real trouble they got into when they pulled that hybrid release on Black Widow. The film was supposed to be a major deal as the first MCU movie since the pandemic began, and it was already delayed by over a year. Chapek promised that Black Widow would only get a theatrical release, but even when the head of Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, was openly opposed to that distribution style, Bob did it anyways. Sure, that probably made Feige upset, but nothing prepared them for the wrath of the movie star Scarlett Johansson. Around the time of Black Widow's release, Johansson sued Disney for breach of contract by doing the hybrid release, accusing the move as a means to avoid paying her the very large box office bonuses that was part of the deal. In return, with the approval of Chapek, the company put out a statement about the lawsuit that said,
"There is no merit whatsoever to this filing. The lawsuit is especially sad and distressing in its callous disregard for the horrific and prolonged global effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Disney has fully complied with Miss Johansson's contract, and furthermore, the release of Black Widow on Disney Plus with Premier Access has significantly enhanced her ability to earn additional compensation on top of the $20 million she has received to date."
As you can imagine, the comment did not go well. As a result, the company was blasted by everyone for antagonizing the actress. Not just by Johansson, her agent and her attorney, Kevin Feige, women's rights organizations, the president of SAG-AFTRA, and more, but even Bob Iger was shocked by how Chapek would think that this was a good idea. It wouldn't be until 2 months later when Disney and Johansson ultimately agreed to settle and for the actress to receive $40 million, to which thankfully resulted in them being on good terms again. Also, around that time, the company decided to end its premium access practice and actually give their movies a chance to only be released in theaters, starting with Free Guy and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. The only catch was that the time between its theatrical release and its Disney Plus premiere would be relatively short, where they only had 30 or 45 days. Then again, the Black Widow incident wasn't the only instance where the public got upset at Disney during that year. In August, they announced that they retired FastPass, a system that allowed guests to be on virtual queues so that they could enter the shorter lines of rides at a later time, and replaced it with Genie Plus, which was part of their new mobile app planner, Disney Genie service. It offers the exact same functions as FastPass, except now you have to pay for it, with the exception of a few big-name rides like Rise of the Resistance or Frozen Ever After, where you have to pay a separate fee if you don't want to wait in the big lines. And as you can see from the announcement video on YouTube, people hated it. But what's worse, it made people realize the harsh reality that Disney was progressively making trips to the parks more and more expensive, where they continuously add a price to just about every single thing you can do there. And the perfect example of that issue is the Star Wars Galactic Cruiser. Opened in March of 2022 at Walt Disney World, the hotel was highly praised for its immersive experience, but was heavily criticized for its price. Keep in mind that you can only stay there for 48 hours, but the cost to do so was $1,200 per person per night. Again, that's only for the hotel, where you could only sleep there for 2 nights, and then you had to take your bags and go.
If you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure. Hypocrisy, hubris.
Inevitably, the new year arrived and Iger's time with Disney was officially over, making Bob Chapek the sole CEO of the company. Keep in mind that 2022 was supposed to be the biggest year of his career, the ultimate testament to his leadership, where all eyes were on him to see how he would steer the company from here on out without the dependency of training wheels. And almost immediately, his first big test as the head of Disney arrived at Walt Disney World's home state. In Florida, Republican politicians approved the Parental Rights in Education Act, also known as the Don't Say Gay Bill, which bans schools in the state from discussing sexual orientation and gender identity. When it was first announced, the bill received backlash from the majority of the public, criticizing that this will not only encourage discrimination and bigotry, along with putting children who aren't cis or straight in danger, but that the law violates the First Amendment and is entirely based on censorship and promotes practices like book banning. From there, people looked upon Disney to call out the bill and take action against it, since Disney has a reputation of being one of the strongest allies of the LGBTQ+ community. Bob Iger was among the first public figures to speak against the bill, but I cannot say the same about Chapek. He was one of those both sides kind of guy in the matter where he didn't want to upset anyone and tried not to say anything about it, especially to hide the fact that the company gave money to some anti-LGBTQ+ lawmakers in Florida. For several days, many people, including some prominent workers at Disney, demanded the company to condemn the bill and show their support to the community. And after going through the immense pressure, Bob Chapek finally came out with a statement.
I want to be crystal clear. I and the entire leadership team unequivocally stand in support of our LGBTQ+ employees, their families, and their communities. And we are committed to creating a more inclusive company and world. We all share the same goal of a more tolerant, respectful world. Where we may differ is in the tactics to get there. And because this struggle is much bigger than any one bill in any one state, I believe the best way for our company to bring about lasting change is through the inspiring content we produce, the welcoming culture we create, and the diverse community organizations we support.
Whoa! This is worthless.
It's less than worthless, my boy.
It wouldn't be until the day after the bill passed when Chapek tried again and actually condemned the legislation, on top of pledging to not give money to homophobic politicians and instead donate to LGBTQ+ organizations. The way Chapek handled the situation, especially when he only did the right thing when it was too late, revealed a dark reality that Disney primarily supports LGBTQ+ rights for corporate reasons. As consequence, animators revealed that their executives demanded movies like Lightyear and Nimona to tone down their gay moments, employees staged a walkout, organizations rejected the donations until the company could prove that they were actually serious, and the divisions within Disney, like Pixar, Marvel, and Disney Television Animation, had to put out a proper statement supporting human rights to distance themselves from Chapek's mishandlings. But the worst outcome of this controversy was the reaction of Republicans. Because of Disney's direct response saying that hating gay people is wrong, it caused the right to treat the company as a political punching bag, portraying them as the ultimate evil empire that is the source of all things woke. They already had a hatred for Disney for how they successfully promote diversity, inclusion, and tolerance, but that moment increased their anger towards them tenfold. Even to this day, conservative politicians, celebrities, and influencers use that hatred towards Disney as a quick and easy way to gather strong engagement and to radicalize their base. Not to mention how Florida Governor Ron DeSantis tried to punish Disney for opposing his agenda, most notably by removing Disney's governmental authority on the Reedy Creek Improvement District, the area that is around Walt Disney World. By that point, despite the company giving him a 3-year extension as CEO, Bob Chapek's relationship with the public is notably bad, especially amongst Disney fans. But the worst thing about it is that he seems aware of what people think of him, yet he acts like he doesn't care. As a businessman, he unapologetically boasts about how much money he's making for the company.
Okay, a lot of times people say, well, why don't you, do something, why does everything have to be franchise-oriented? Because that's our barrier to entry. Because if any of our competitors had our intellectual property, guess what they would be doing? The exact same thing we're doing, but they don't have it, and we do.
And not only did he ignore the criticisms of trips to the Disney parks becoming too expensive, but he even had a prejudiced view towards animation by thinking that only kids watch cartoons.
Are you serious? No!
I'm just saying, if you're gonna run a media empire that started as an animation studio and its foundation to this day is animation, then maybe your viewpoint on the medium should be a little more positive than labeling it as a kid's genre. And yet, the irony with Chapek is that for someone who puts money as his top priority, he's not really good at it. One example of this is what happened to Lightyear. This was supposed to be a major deal for Disney, as this was the first time since the pandemic that they were releasing a Pixar film in theaters. The previous ones were only given a Disney Plus exclusive release. I've already mentioned Soul, but they continued the practice for the next 2 years with Luca and Turning Red. And in their mind, what better way to reintroduce Pixar to the big screen than with a Toy Story spin-off? You'd think this would be a box office victory, except it wasn't. The movie unfortunately became a complete failure with lower than average reviews and only accumulated $226.4 million on a $200 million budget. I know there are several reasons why it flopped, but the most notable factor is because of how the Disney Plus strategy with Pixar's movies screwed it over. Over the years since the pandemic began, the public was trained to await the next big Disney and Pixar animated feature on Disney Plus, and even when the film would be released on the big screen, there was no rush to go and see it because they know that it'll come to streaming soon afterwards. That's why Encanto was considered a box office disappointment, but became a phenomenon after it appeared on Disney Plus a month after its initial release. It's also worth noting that Lightyear was attacked by a right-wing hate campaign because that 1 second of a same-sex kiss was enough for conservatives to spread hate speech and promote homophobia across social media. And the worst part is that the same outcome happened to the Disney animation movie released several months later, Strange World, with the same subpar reviews, the same homophobic attacks, and the same box office failure. With all of these events coming one after another, 2022 seemed like it was setting a new low standard for Disney. With Chapek fully in charge, it felt like the company was entering a new dark age. Sure, the Marvel movies were still successful, and the subscription number of Disney's 3 streaming platforms combined did exceed Netflix's, but it was clear that they were in rougher shape than what they used to be, and the signs all pointed that it was going downhill from there. That was until November 20th.
Breaking overnight, a change in leadership at Disney, the parent company of ABC News. Bob Iger is returning as CEO.
In a shocking turn of events, Bob Chapek will step down as CEO, with Iger coming back to lead the company after he stepped aside as CEO in February 2020.
It's a stunning development in the business world overnight. Bob Iger is back at the top of Disney. Just 2 years after retiring from a legendary run, he replaces his own successor, Bob Chapek.
In a very unexpected twist, the Walt Disney Company announced that not only did they fire Bob Chapek and gave him a severance check worth $23.4 million, but they also brought back Bob Iger to give him back the position of CEO, to which he later extended his contract so that he could remain as the boss until the end of 2026. It was a decision that the board had been considering since June of that year. Among all the mistakes Chapek made during his time, the one that crossed the line for them was firing the chairman of Walt Disney Television, Peter Rice. This may not have been a popular topic amongst the public, but it was a serious scandal for insiders and the one that initiated the board to consider a replacement. Even before he first left, Iger was throwing some subtle shade at Chapek for his lack of creative skills. Across the internet, Chapek's firing was a moment of celebration, a glimmer of hope that could reignite that spark again to put Disney back on top, especially now with the more reputable Bob back in charge. The following year in 2023, Iger went back to work to do the same thing he did when he began his CEO job: fix the mistakes made by the previous boss. In the case of being a political target, Disney finally stood up against Ron DeSantis and filed a lawsuit against the governor and his team for using his political powers to continuously attack and demonize the company for exercising their freedom of speech. Then there's their next animated features, to which they've dedicated a much longer theatrical window to help their box office run. In the case of Pixar's Elemental, it had the studio's weakest opening since the first Toy Story, but it had some of the strongest staying power of that summer, and was the first sign that the box office strength of Disney and Pixar's animated films was healing, especially when Elemental was the company's first animated movie since Frozen 2 to make more than $400 million. Unfortunately, not all tactics to repair the company meant good news. In an effort to cut $5.5 billion in costs, Iger revealed that the company had to remove 7,000 jobs across its divisions. On top of that, Disney was also following the lead of other streaming platforms by removing content from Disney+, some of which were exclusives that now there is no legitimate way to watch them. And they also announced that they were closing the Galactic Star Cruiser on September 30th, making its lifespan only around 18 months. As for Bob Chapek, several months after his firing, he and the company were sued by shareholders in a class action lawsuit, where they claimed that the executives misled them about the subscription numbers of Disney+, portraying the platform as doing great when it was actually in pretty rough shape. On top of that, at the end of August, Disney was hit with another lawsuit for the same reasons. This time, both Chapek and Iger found themselves to be among the defendants.
A pipe squished me all out of shape.
Dang.
That's better.
Oh.
I think it's safe to say that not everyone who was a CEO at Disney was great, but you can credit them with at least one good thing they've done for the company. Sure, Ron Miller got the job because he was Walt Disney's son-in-law and only lasted for about a year. But he did create Touchstone Pictures to allow the company to make adult-oriented content. Yes, the second half of Michael Eisner's time was an absolute joke, but he played a key role in saving the company during the first half of his period. And maybe Bob Iger is no longer viewed as the renowned boss of Disney, especially with dumb comments like this.
We managed as an industry to negotiate a very good deal with the Directors Guild that reflects the value that the directors contribute to this great business. We wanted to do the same thing with the writers, and we'd like to do the same thing with the actors. There's a level of expectation that they have that is just not realistic.
But he will be remembered with his acquisitions for turning the company into a global empire. But when it comes to Bob Chapek, I honestly cannot think of a single good thing he did during his time as CEO. Every significant moment with him has always been a detriment to Disney. And the worst case, some have left bad consequences that they still have to endure to this day. Yes, some could argue that he started off with a massive disadvantage due to the pandemic. But But the most notable missteps that the company faced back then were caused by Chapek's own decisions. From the Scarlett Johansson lawsuit, to the handling of the Don't Say Gay bill controversy, to the never-ending price hikes at the parks that made guests upset, to ruining Pixar's box office reputation with the use of Disney+. But the thing that makes him the worst CEO Disney ever had can be best described in the satirical video made by the Warp Zone.
What really chuffs my buttons is you did the one truly unforgivable act. You f*** with the magic, Bob.
Why'd you have to f*** with the magic, Bob?
You don't f*** with the magic!
There was a time when Disney meant so much to the public that they were viewed as being the best at everything they do, whether it be animation, movies, TV shows, rides, and more. And the reason for their high quality was because they felt like they actually cared about giving people a great time, that the quality of their craft is more important than making them profitable. But then came Chapek, whose greedy fixation on money tarnished all that hard work of maintaining that reputation, and ultimately left Disney to be exposed as just another big corporation whose goal is to just make a profit, no matter what it takes. I'm honestly not worried about Disney because history has proven that they are capable of picking themselves back up after taking a hit. But considering that the company has been going through a phase where they love retelling their classic movies, let's just hope that this is a story that Disney will not remake anytime soon. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Now I know people are ready to go and write down one of two comments. One, I know there are going to be some people who will say that it is pronounced Chapek, but regardless if it's pronounced Chapek or Chapek or whatever, at least you all have an idea of what this story is all about. And two, I also know that there are going to be some people who will go and say that Iger's comeback is not necessarily an improvement when compared to Chapek's years. Especially with the way that he and all the other major studios such as Netflix, Warner Brothers, Universal, Sony, and many more have been handling the writers and actors strike. And yes, as of the release of this video, the big Hollywood strike is still going on because executives refuse to give in to the demands of both actors and writers. And as a professional actor myself, I stand in solidarity with the strikers for them to keep on fighting until they ultimately get the livable wages and job securities that they deserve. And if you want to help out and support the strikers, then all you have to do is donate to the Entertainment Community Fund at entertainmentcommunity.org. Oh, and also, if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more crazy videos and reviews like this one. And with all that said, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see you later, dudes!
And they are adding to a set of challenges that this business is already facing that is, quite frankly, very disruptive.
So they're not being
and
realistic?
dangerous. No, they're not.
Why not?
I can't answer that question.